in and out of the Beltway. From large cities to small towns to the rural heartland. From sea to shining sea. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Inside the News.
Welcome back to another week of Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. My name is Guy Wehman. Top left, we have Frank Vernuccio. Bottom middle, we have Ben Brunson. You can see us on YouTube, AUN TV, and you can hear us across our radio affiliates all across the country. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing just great, Guy. It is a pleasure to be with you and Frank once again.
All right, and Frank, how you doing?
Doing well in the de-icing state of New York. It's March, and we're hoping eventually to get above the freezing mark.
The de-icing state. Okay. There is a lot on our plate this week, and we're going to get started here. Let's start first with the immediate news of CPAC, because there's a lot more we want to get into, like on segment 3 and segment 2. But the GOP seems to be a little bit more rejuvenated here, Frank, after our former president, Donald Trump, spoke.
Well, it does. And of course, there was a myth that the media was attempting to perpetuate, was that the Republican Party was about to split apart, perhaps a new party being formed. One of the major points that Donald Trump made in his speech was that the Republican Party is not about to split apart. Donald Trump is not starting a political party on his own. And it was interesting, if you flip the channels going from station to station, the media was desperately trying to push that story. And of course, with just a few words, former President Trump dispelled the myth.
All right, Ben Brunson, we're down here in the Sunshine State, and they did not offer us any tickets to go to Orlando, but it would have been fun to be there while the president was talking, Ben.
Well, I did have the opportunity to get tickets, but I didn't have the time to go. The president, I think, did a couple of things that are pretty critical for the GOP. And the first and foremost, as Frank said, was to reaffirm right from the jump that he has no intention of starting another party. This has been left-stream media, Democratic propaganda. Mm-hmm. Of course, the entire point of the second impeachment fiasco that the Democrats perpetrated on the country was to try to tarnish Donald Trump, try to destroy his ability to lead the GOP. The Democrats know fully well that Donald Trump has redefined the GOP into the party of the working man, the working class in this country. And that gives the GOP a great future if the GOP continues on that path. What the Democrats want to see is the Mitt Romney school of the GOP that's all about corporate elitism, and let's get along and export all the remaining jobs in this country to China, and we'll all get rich in the process, we being the people in Washington, D.C. in power. And that is what was soundly rejected by Donald Trump. It has brought more votes and more energy and invigoration to the GOP than I have seen since Ronald Reagan left Washington, D.C. By the way, Ronald Reagan did a lot of the same things, and not quite as tilted towards the working class as Donald Trump, but Ronald Reagan reinvigorated the U.S. economy after a period of stagnation, and it benefited the middle class more than anyone else. And Donald Trump did the exact same for 4 years, and he is the future of the party. His policies are the future of the party. Whether I still can't tell you whether or not he's going to run in 4 years, but I would agree with all the pundits who say that if he does run, it's his nomination to take, and the party will line up behind him. But I still lean towards his goal of naming and anointing his successor and being the power broker behind the scenes.
You know, Frank, what scares the Democrats the most is Donald Trump. He's an outsider, truly is the outsider, and he knows the inner workings of the swamp and what the progressives are up to. And the Democrats don't like that at all. And he's their worst nightmare, isn't it, Frank?
Well, the second term of Donald Trump would have been their worst nightmare. The first 4 years of the Trump administration was basically getting his feet wet and understanding how the process works. Mm-hmm. His goals, which were great, couldn't be fully implemented simply because he didn't have the bodies in place to do it. It's one thing to replace the secretary of a government agency, the secretary of HUD, the secretary of defense, and all that. But realistically, it's the under secretaries and the people even below that level who actually do the day-to-day work. And unfortunately, the Republicans have been rank amateurs in getting their people in place in those secondary or third level positions. The Democrats have made a science of it. If you look at the end of the Obama administration, and just as you look at the end of the Clinton administration, those people who had been presidential appointees were slotted into civil service positions. They held on. The Republicans have simply not done that. And that's one of the reasons why a second Trump term, where he could have slotted some of his people into those positions that the Democrats have been holding on to for decades, frankly, would have been tremendous. It would have really drained that swamp. That's why there was sheer terror, and I use that word in every sense of it, about the Democrats of a second Trump administration.
You know something, Ben? Every time we talk about the swamp, I keep seeing this image of Vindman, because he is the pure definition of that. That it's like, I'm the one in charge of the foreign policy, not you. And the president is the president, not this lowlife Vindman.
You're talking about former President Vindman?
Comrade Vindman.
Yes. Oh, that's right. He was just a lieutenant colonel who was completely confused as to the chain of command in this country and was sure that the president should obey all the orders given by Lieutenant Colonel Vindman to him on matters involving the Ukraine. You're completely correct. He embodies the deep state culture of everything that's wrong with Washington, D.C. It came out in his testimony in spades. He really was incredulous that the president of the United States failed to honor everything he told him to do as far as what policies should be followed in Ukraine. And thankfully, he's in the history books at this point, but it says it all. And Washington, D.C. is full of Vindmans, and they all think that they know best and that they're the real power. And unfortunately, in many cases, they are the real power. We see it within the FBI and the CIA and other institutions.
You know something, Frank? The Democrats with all the swamp and everything, it's almost like Inspector Gadget, go Gadget arms, go Gadget. And that's what they do. They push these little buttons and all these little things just start happening, huh, Frank?
Well, one of the things that does not happen, of course, is that presidents have found that they've given an order and somehow it gets dissipated as it goes down the ranks. And eventually their term runs out and the people who dissipated those orders continue. That's why you've seen complaints in the past. Remember, before Donald Trump, one of the things people used to complain about was that it doesn't matter who gets elected, a Democrat or Republican, nothing ever changes. Well, Donald Trump came in and things started changing. And I think there was a true culture shock on the part of official permanent Washington that someone was actually going to make real changes. We have a short memory as a society. That feeling that nothing ever changes in Washington was so strong in the years right before Donald Trump, and the minute that Donald Trump assumed office. And then everything changed. Changed the way the American people wanted it to change, didn't change the way the bureaucrats in Washington wanted it to go.
All right, we've got cancel culture and the 1.9 trillion House passed bill. Ben, which one do you want to take first? Go.
Well, let's talk about legislation and where we're at. I believe the Democrats only have a 7-vote majority in the House, if I'm not mistaken. 30, 40 years ago, that slim a majority would ensure bicameral, bipartisan legislation being passed through the House. Neither party could do anything with only a 7-vote majority because neither party could hold on to all of their votes. In today's Democratic Party, they can pass radical left-wing legislation like the Equality Act, like this $1.7 trillion in pork spending, which makes no sense on any level. And they can get it through the House, even with just a 7-vote majority. It tells you everything about where the Democratic Party is at, what it's become. We can only hope that the Senate can hold the line. I think everything's going to hinge on whether the filibuster remains an institution in the Senate, because if it is ignored and removed as a procedure that's followed in the Senate, then the Democrats are going to pass these legislations that are going to be increasingly coming out of the House. The one thing you can guarantee is a string of far left legislation, the type of dream packages that AOC could only dream of a year ago are going to be passed through the House now. And that's where we're at. So let's hope. We have crazy spending going on. All we have to do to have the economy is going to grow at least 10% in Q1. I think it would have grown a lot, significantly more in Q1 had Donald Trump been reelected and we didn't have this wet blanket being thrown over the economy with all these Biden policies, jobs being killed right and left, energy being shut down as a sector. And yet on top of that, we're still going to have great growth. If we would just reopen the economy, we could stop all these stimulus bills that the Democrats are absolutely hell-bent to get through Congress, and they make no sense. Just open the economy up completely.
Ben started with legislative processes, and Frank, I dare say, going back to a previous program, it's going to come down to Manchin and Sinema. What do you think?
Well, it is, but it's also going to come down to informing the American people of what some of these dollars being spent are going for. I've seen numbers that say that if that $1.9 trillion stimulus bill actually went to the people themselves instead of pork projects that benefit the Democratic Party and their supporters, every American could practically get a check for $10,000. The stimulus bill is the summit of corruption in Congress and in legislation. The American people are being extorted for their measly, $1,400 stimulus checks for family to fund all of these Democrat projects and to bail out the horrendous economic policies of blue states, which have wasted the taxpayer dollars. They've now exhausted their own statewide population, and they're trying now to tap into the entire American population to fund their corruption and to fund their obvious financial mistakes.
You know, Ben, Frank mentioned two things: the embodiment of corruption and extorting the American public. Those two things, in my mind, I'm thinking the RICO statute, and Congress is getting away with it, Ben.
Well, the one thing that I can guarantee is that with this administration and congressional makeup, the taxpayers in red states are going to be funding all of the blue states' profligate spending until there's a change in Congress. Mm-hmm. So if that's not enough motivation for 30 plus states, red states, to vote Republican right down the line, I don't know what is, because there's going to be a great wealth transfer out of states like Texas and Florida to Illinois, New York, Washington, California, and New Jersey to pay for their insane spending that is completely out of control on every level. These states are not only financially bankrupt, but they're losing their tax base. Their policies are driving wealthy individuals, high wage earners out of the states. These people are leaving, as everyone knows, to go to states like Florida and Texas, and ballooning the tax base in those states. But instead of looking with some retrospective in the mirror and saying, gee, maybe we ought to change what we do here in New York, everyone seems to double down on the same crazy policies. And I just don't know what it takes for voters in states like California and New York to wake up and say, wow, gee, what's happening to San Francisco is not good. It's not good for California. It's not good for San Francisco. Exploding crime in New York is not good for New York City. It's not making life any better. You'd think that would be enough motivation to kick some of these crazy mayors like de Blasio out of office, but I don't know. There's some collective insanity right now in these blue states.
All right, that was Ben Brunson. He's with the Falstaff, Enigma, and Esther, Sling. Those are his 2 books that he's written. You can find those at Amazon.com. You can also find those books at benbrunson.com. We also have Frank Vernuccio, and Frank is with the American Analysis of News and Media. And it's an organization founded for the specific purpose of providing well-researched, authoritative ideas and thought. Also, the Minute Report for America. You can find more about Frank at usagovpolicy.com. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. This is our first segment. We're going to draw to a close. Thank you so much for being with us this week. Coming up, we're going to talk about some international things, and it's really scary with this missile strike on Syria. Our guys have some thoughts. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.